I don't think that there's anything in it for the United States compared to a truly cooperative world where we're actually solving global problems. The United States has spent trillions and trillions of dollars on these awful wars that it has fought. And like you say, it gets away with them. There is impunity. One of my colleagues at Columbia wrote a wonderful paper, a little disturbing, about the fact that the United States overthrew around 30 governments in the Americas in the 20th century. You know, and I've watched some of those coups with my own eyes, by the way, because the CIA is an unaccountable organization. And since it operates in secrecy, it's never held to account for blunder after blunder after blunder. But we've overthrown governments, we've destabilized societies. You know, in the African context, the CIA thought it was really important that Lumumba be assassinated rather than to have a true popular leader in the Congo after independence, that kind of thing, putting the country on a tailspin for decades afterwards, as if this is somehow good for America and so on. You know, there are people who argue the line that, well, this is for the U.S. military-industrial complex or to keep vital resources and so on. There may be motivations like that, but it's so stupid because it does not deliver anything of benefit or security for the American people, actually. But it is a mindset. The mindset is real. I know the mindset. And the mindset, by the way, if anybody plays the board game, which was popular in my youth in the United States, the game of Risk. That's a board game where you have a world map, and the goal is to have your piece on every place in the world. That's how you win. That is the American mindset, I'm sorry to tell you, which is that we're not safe unless we have military bases everywhere. We already have them in 85 countries, 800 overseas military bases. It's not making us safe. It's making the world unstable. Yeah. And this is just a category error and a conceptual blunder, but it is the neocon agenda. I wrote a book in 2019 called A New Foreign Policy Beyond American Exceptionalism. I can tell you it was not a bestseller. I don't know how many people read it, but its effects I don't feel, because basically was saying this approach, this unipolar approach, this idea that America is the one country that gets to write all the rules, this is not going to deliver even for the American people, much less for the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, this also at a high cost to the American people, a nation itself torn apart. You've just had your own January 6th insurrection, and whilst you're spending billions of dollars on this proxy war, and we all know this is nothing but a proxy war, with the Ukrainians being the cannon fodder, whilst you are at the same time also moving to the bigger war with China. You constitute, 3% of the world's population, and yet you insist on this incredible dominance in the world.
First, we are currently 4.2% of the world population and about 15.5% of world production measured in international prices. So it's a rich country, it's a big country, but not a country in a position to run the world. China, after all, has a population that is more than 4 times the United States and an economy that at international prices is larger than the US economy. And so how we're going to run China? Well, of course not. And that was the whole gist of President Xi Jinping's speech to the 20th Party Congress this week, which is the United States is not going to run China. And China has also a mindset. If the US mindset is to run the world, the Chinese mindset is the other side is trying to run the world. You know, their view is that the West is tendentious and a threat. And they go back to Britain in 1839, launching the Opium Wars, one of the most remarkable wars in history, because it was a war to ensure free trade in opium in China, if you can believe this. But that was the British. And the British were the Americans of the 19th century, or the Americans are the British of the mid-20th to 21st century. Arrogant, by the way, very arrogant. And the British are still arrogant, though they don't have an empire anymore. They are still the biggest cheerleaders for the war in Ukraine, which is really annoying to me, because also I regard the war in Ukraine like the Crimean War, which was a war in which Britain and France wanted to teach Russia a lesson in the 1850s. And their leader at the time in Britain was Palmerston. And Palmerston just wanted to smash the British Empire. And that's how Boris Johnson or Liz Truss talk right now. Of course, they're a small shadow of what they were in the 19th century, but the language and the Russophobia, the hatred of Russia, actually goes back a long, long time. But none of this serves any useful purpose, and it all becomes vastly more dangerous in that the U.S. really has counterparts right now that are powerful, China being the main one. And China's rise is driving American strategists crazy. It's a kind of profound neurotic reaction right now, because the U.S. is supposed to be the unipolar world, and there's China. What are they doing there? They were supposed to come under the U.S. umbrella, but they want to do their own thing. And that is unforgivable. So we're virtually in a Cold War with China right now that the U.S. has instigated, because all of our documents, including one that Biden put out a couple of weeks ago, says China's the biggest threat to the international order. Well, you look at it. How about the wars since 1980? The United States has been in nonstop wars, more than 190 military interventions. How many wars has China been in since 1980? That would be 0. But they're the big threat. This is, again, kind of Orwellian mind speak. This is not honest, but China's viewed as a threat. So the United States is now trying to contain China the same way that the United States contained the Soviet Union. We're literally trying to choke China off from access to technology. I think it's incredibly naive. Yeah. I think it's incredibly provocative. Yep. And by the way, what we're doing vis-a-vis Taiwan is just like we did vis-a-vis Ukraine, which is we're saying every day, we'll protect you, Taiwan, we'll protect you, Taiwan, we'll protect you, Taiwan, giving confidence to the most independent-minded Taiwanese to say, look, we've got the U.S. backing. And now the president of Taiwan is saying we're a sovereign country. Yep. So the whole one China, two systems approach, which was the basis of stability of U.S.-China relations, being thrown out the door. Yep. But Taiwan is 23 million people, an island. China's 1.4 billion people, a nuclear superpower. Yep. And the United States is going to defend them? Well, are we really going to have nuclear Armageddon over this issue? And this is the kind of provocative foreign policy that the United States needs to stop running.
Yeah, and then we have Mrs. Pelosi, for absolutely no reason whatsoever, flying to Taiwan to literally poke the Chinese in the eyes. It seems insane and deeply provocative. And it doesn't deliver anything. Failure in Iraq, failure in Libya, failure in Syria. And, well, we also know that, ultimately, total humiliation in Afghanistan.
The idea is U.S. security depends on full spectrum dominance by the United States. That the U.S. can only be secure if it is dominant over every other country and every other region of the world. Now, no other country lives in those conditions. No country has security because of full spectrum dominance, and the US has an illusion that it has full spectrum dominance. So what the US needs to, and when I say the US, of course, we're not talking about populations, we're talking about small numbers of leaders of the permanent state. We're not even necessarily talking about presidents, by the way, because this is foreign policy doctrine of the Pentagon and the security institutions of the United States. Politicians come and go, but this has been doctrine for a long time. And the point is that the US wants a kind of security that it would absolutely deny to the other 96% of the world. It doesn't say to the only thing the US says to the rest of you want security, you follow us. We'll be the security. Of course, then you have to follow us. You can't have any ideas of your own. And when we need certain things, you'll grant them because we're us. And so it's a certain asymmetry, which I think is a dangerous asymmetry.
Professor Sachs, we are running out of time here. I want to just return to my opening questions to you. I guess I'm asking for confirmation on the two simple yet central questions of this discussion. In your own words, is it false to claim and utterly disingenuous to claim that this conflict in Ukraine is the result of an unprovoked invasion, as is being stated in the mainstream media and the US NATO leadership on a daily basis, an unprovoked invasion by the Russians? And number two, that Vladimir Putin is a modern-day Hitler, hell-bent on the restoration of Russian power, which necessitates the grabbing of land.
This is a war that has been a hot war since 2014 and an absolutely avoidable war. And if Ukraine had followed a path of neutrality with security guarantees, as was on the table as late as March of this year, this horrible war could have been avoided altogether or stopped early on. And we should listen because we need to negotiate with Russia and with President Putin as the president of Russia. We need to negotiate because we need this war to end before it ends us.
One last question, Professor Sachs, your view. I believe, like I think many millions of other people around the world, that this war can in fact be stopped today. It can end today if the United States of America will allow that. That it is in the hands of the United States of America to stop this war today.
This war could stop now. And in March, the two sides, with the brilliant mediation of Turkey, actually were exchanging documents to end the war. And then Ukraine walked away from the negotiating table. Best guess, because their American patrons said, you should fight. You don't have to take neutrality. You should fight. And we were close to this war ending in March. It could have been avoided last December had Biden said, we are not expanding NATO. We hear you. No need to do that. We can have peace and cooperation, and it can end now. And it needs to, because otherwise it will continue to escalate. The first damage will be the destruction of Ukraine itself, its people, its physical infrastructure, its buildings, all of the suffering. But this is beyond Ukraine. This is escalating towards nuclear confrontation. The Ukrainians are urging that we keep escalating, and if a more general war breaks out, they write that NATO should attack Russia. This is mind-bogglingly wrong-headed and dangerous. We all have a stake in this war ending now.
We have 1 minute left, Professor Sachs. Who blew up the pipeline?
The United States blew up the pipeline. They told us that they were going to. Biden was standing next to Chancellor Scholz and said, if Russia invades, Nord Stream is finished. And a reporter said to him, Mr. President, that's a Russian-German project. How can you say that? And President Biden said, we have our ways. So that's the presumption until proven otherwise. Lo and behold, the Europeans can't figure out who did it. Lo and behold, the Swedes can't even share their intelligence with Denmark and Germany. The fingerprints are all over this thing. I believe that the overwhelming likelihood is the US did it and tried to point otherwise, but we'll probably hear soon from the Europeans, it was sabotage, but the trail has run cold. We just can't figure out who did it. That's what we're probably going to hear as more patter from the US-led information system.
The war continues, the destruction continues, and yeah, what I want to know is there any sign whatsoever in your mind, something that you've observed that you might point to that will give us hope that sanity ultimately will prevail?
You know, sanity can prevail because clear-thinking people all over the world know how dangerous this is. And we need to keep pushing and need to keep saying, stop the war. And this is for the sake of all humanity, not only for those immediately suffering, but the whole world is at risk as long as this war continues.